Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The Eclipse of Islam. What Happened to Islam After Umar? By Ghulam Ahmad Parwez. Dedicated to late Maqbul M. Farhat, former coordinator, Bazam Tolu-e-Islam, London. Part 5. Islam was no longer deen but became religion. The belief that beyond Quran, knowledge can be acquired directly from God, not only resulted in the fabrication of traditions but also they got the status of deen. Consequently, Islam no longer remained deen but it turned into religion. We explained the difference between deen and religion in the third chapter. Briefly, deen can become a practical system in its independent state. An independent state means a state which is ruled in accordance with the laws, commands, principles and values of Quran, of God. If such a state does not exist, then deen does not flourish and it turns into religion. In religion, fundamentals of deen take the shape of rituals, which do not produce the results as desired by the deen. By performing these rituals, one is happy or has an illusion that he is fulfilling the commands of God. The meanings of the verse Istaklaf fil ard have been changed. The following verse of Surah Nur is the most prominent Quranic verse about the establishment of an independent Islamic state. Allah has promised, to those among you who believe and work righteous deeds, that He will, of a surety, grant them in the land, inheritance of power, as He granted it to those before them. That He will establish in authority their religion, the one which He has chosen for them. And that He will change their state, after the fear in which they lived, to one of security and peace. 24:55. It is clear from this verse that the establishment of an independent government is a mandatory result of the firm belief and good deeds. And deen can be established only in this way. This means that deen cannot be established without the establishment of our Muslims' own government. But we have seen that the establishment of government is not necessary for imamah. History shows that, with the exception of Ali, not a single imam had power. Government. To overcome this difficulty, it was said that in this verse, istaklaf means spiritual imamah and not worldly power. According to Al-Kafi, Imam Abu Jafar said, "First of all God created Shab Qadar, in which first He created the Prophet and the Wasi. God's wisdom made this a yearly occurrence in which all events of the coming year were registered. Whoever will deny this will deny the knowledge of God, because prophets and muhaddirs tell people what they receive from God. Jibreel brings this information during that night. I asked, do Jibreel and other angels visit muhaddirs and others? He said, there is no doubt about the prophets. Besides this, since the beginning of the universe until the end, a representative of God will remain on earth. And, during every Shab Qadar, God will send His commands to that person who is close to Him. By God, angels and spirits descended during Shab Qadar on Adam with the message of God. When Adam died, he was succeeded by his wasi. After Adam, God's commands came to the prophets and later to their Asiya in Shab Qadar. And by God, when the command of God came to all prophets from Adam to Muhammad Mustafa, he was ordered to convey this to such and such person. In his book, After the Prophet, about the Waliyan-e-Amra, God said, the people who are believers and have good deeds, God has promised that they will be made Khalifa on earth like their predecessors. It means that God says that after your Nabi I will make you Khalifa of my knowledge, deen and prayers, just like the Osius of Adam. Then He sent the last prophet so that nobody is worshipped except Him. He said, I should be worshipped with faith. No prophet will come after Muhammad. So those who say contrary to this are disobedient of Allah. So, after Muhammad, God has given access of knowledge to Waliyan-e-Amra. Ash-Shafi, Volume 1, p. 284-85. Not only that, in other traditions of al-Kafi, desire of power and government is called a path of destruction. One tradition says, Imam Raza said that the desire of power is more dangerous and damaging than the presence of two wolves in the herd of sheep that lost its keeper. Opening parenthesis. Ash-Shafi, Volume 2, p. 316. Another tradition says, Hazrat Abu Abdullah said that whoever wished for state and government power is destroyed. Ibad. Separation of religion and politics. With this belief, the worldly government and spiritual state were declared as two separate domains. But the worldly government was condemned. This separation of religion and politics based on the concept of imama was not confined to Shias but also penetrated the Sunnis. The monarchy had already become hereditary under the influence of the belief in hereditary imama. That is why after the four caliphs, Khalifas, all Muslim kingdoms, whether of Shias or Sunnis, were established on the basis of inheritance. Under the concept of duality of religion and politics, government affairs and Islamic law affairs were also divided into two entities. State affairs went to the king while Islamic legal affairs were assigned to religious leaders. The difference in the personal law and public law is also the result of this division. In this way the state was divided into two entities in which two parallel governments were established, one of the king and the other of the religious leaders. This division not only resulted in the division of the government but also damaged the system of legislation that was proposed by the Quran and was the basis of deen. Legislative principle of the Quranic political system was that the Ummah with consultation and within the limits of Quranic commands and principles should make laws according to the need of the time. Quranic limits were unchangeable but new laws used to change with the need of the time. However, monarchy ended the system of consultation while legislation according to the need of the time was declared illegal by the religious leaders. Possibility of legislation ended. The Imam Shafi'i school of thought declared that all commands and laws are present in the traditions, which are complete and not changeable. Therefore, there is no need to make new laws according to the need of time, nor any change is allowed in the present laws. This was the belief of Ahl Hadith that was resisted by Allamas. Ahl Fiqh, who said that in the light of the Quran and traditions, and on the basis of analogy, qiyas, new commands can be made. And any command which has consensus of the Ummah will become law. We have a popular belief that there are four sources of law, i.e., the Quran, traditions, analogy and consensus. This is based on the Fiqh legal school of thought. This provided an opportunity to make new laws, but later they also adopted the belief that the door of ijtihad, independent judgment, has been closed. Therefore, previous legal decisions cannot be changed and new laws cannot be formulated. Ahl Hadith believed that when there is a conflict between the Quran and Hadith, then the command of tradition will prevail because tradition supersedes the Quran and can even abrogate a Quranic command. This belief was adopted by the followers of the four Sunni schools of thoughts, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali and Maliki. A prominent imam of Hanafi fiqh, Abul Hasan Ubaidullah al-Kaki says, any verse that is against this school of thought which we follow, is either marwal, has more than one interpretation, or cancelled, and similarly any such tradition is marwal or cancelled. Tariq Fiqh Islam, compiled by Allama Kizri, p. 421. It means that if there is a conflict between the Quranic command and a decision of fiqh, then first it should be tried to expand the meaning of the verse to conform to the fiqh explanation. If it is not possible, then it should be considered as cancelled. On this point, there is a heated debate between Ahl Hadith and Ahl Fiqh because Ahl Hadith does not consider any tradition cancelled which they believe is authentic. However, they both agree on the cancellation of the Quranic commands. At the present moment, the Ummah is divided into these sects, i.e., Shia and Sunni. In Sunnis we have Ahl Hadith, and Ahl Fiqh, while Ahl Fiqh is divided into Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali and Maliki Fiqh or schools of thoughts. All these sects recognize traditions or the decision of imams as authority in Deen. The Quran is now used only for recitation or blessing. In our time, Maulvi Chakravarti invited people towards pure Quranic teachings. But for him also Islam was a religion and not Deen. Hence his followers also became a sect. Allah Quran. And in this way he became a cause of damage for the Quranic thoughts. Revival of the capitalist system. The list of man-made ideologies which cause atrocities on human society is very long. But in principle we can confine them in three categories. 1. Monarchy. 2. Religious leadership. And 3. The capitalist system. The Quran ended all these curses and gave the human being real freedom. In the previous chapters of this book, we have seen a reflection of this freedom or emancipation. In the present chapter, we detailed the Ajami conspiracies which effectively snatched the Quran away from Muslims, revived these curses and enforced them as real Islam. We have given a detailed description of this conspiracy in the current chapter. We have already seen how these two curses were revived, and how the capitalist system was revived and made part of Islam. This is a very tragic story which needs an independent book. I have written a lot on this subject. At the present moment we will focus on the point that after declaring traditions as authority of Deen instead of the Quran, it was not difficult to revive these curses. These traditions were fabricated or compiled during the reign of Bani Abbas when the capitalist and feudalist system had been imposed on the state system. Traditions were fabricated to declare them Islamic. Some of them entered into the books of traditions and some in our history books. The Islamic law, fiqh, was based on these traditions. Hence the capitalist system was declared Islamic according to the traditions and fiqh. A few examples. O ye who believe! There are indeed many among the priests and anchorites, who in falsehood devour the substance of men and hinder them from the way of Allah. And there are those who bury gold and silver and spend it not in the way of Allah. Announce unto them a most grievous penalty. 9/34. On the day when heat will be produced out of that wealth in the fire of hell, and with it will be branded their foreheads, their flanks, and their backs, their flanks, and their backs. This is the treasure which ye buried for yourselves. Taste ye, then, the treasures ye buried. 9:35. This is an unambiguous Quranic command which uproots the capitalist system. Now see how this verse is explained in accordance with the traditions. Ibn Abbas said, when this verse was revealed, it had a negative impact on the Muslims, who considered it a burden. Umar told the people that he would remove their worry and resolve this problem. Umar went to the Prophet and said, "This verse is a burden on your companions." The Prophet said, "God made zakah mandatory to clean the rest of your assets. Inheritance was made mandatory so that your heirs can inherit your assets." Ibn Abbas says that Hazrat Umar was very pleased to hear this and cried with joy, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." Abu Dawud, quoted in Mishkat, chapter Al-Zakah. According to this explanation, that was presented as a saying of the Prophet, the meaning of this Quranic verse was that after paying 2.5% zakat every year one can accumulate as much wealth as one likes. This argument was supported by history which said that there were many big capitalists among the companions. Usman Ghani was a very rich person. Abdul Rahman ben Auf had a huge business. The first camel of his trade goods caravan used to be in Medina and the last one in Egypt. On the basis of such traditions and historic episodes, Islamic laws were developed according to which no limit can be imposed on the ownership of wealth, property and land. It is not possible to go into detail here. In our era, Maulana Maududi had given a brief in his book Masala-e Milkiyat-e-Zamin. The issue of the ownership of land. Islam did not impose any limit on the quantity of any kind of property. The ownership of legitimate things, which are acquired through legitimate means, when all Islamic legal dues have been paid, can be kept without any limit. There is no limit on the ownership of money, animals, under-use goods, houses, rides or anything. Then why the Islamic law is inclined towards limiting the ownership of agricultural property or preventing acquisition of land by one person is made practically impossible. 1950 edition, p. 52. This is the Islam which is presented to us through fiqh, traditions and history. If anybody dares object, he is silenced by saying, "Who understands Islam better, you or the Prophet and the respected elders?" Did you see the result of the Ajami conspiracy? Changes in beliefs. So far we had confined our discussion to the commands of God. However, the basic issue is belief, because it is belief which is the building block of life of both an individual and a nation. When the Quran says, "Because Allah will never change the grace which He hath bestowed on a people until they change what is in their own souls. And verily Allah is He who heareth and knoweth all things." 8:53. It meant that psychology is changed through beliefs. It was the result of the Quranic beliefs and ideas that the Arabs produced a great revolution. In the early period of Islam, Ajam knew this reality and distorted these Quranic beliefs so that now we are unable to find even their traces. In this context we will present an example. The basic teaching of the Quran is that a human being is responsible for his own deeds and nations made their own fate. It was the belief in the accountability that a small group of Muslims not only became the inheritors of the empires of Rome and Iran, but also destroyed or overshadowed their centuries-old civilization and led humanity into a new era. Iranians and Christians both had declared that human beings are helpless, or their fate is predetermined. The nations who had this belief were unable to confront Arabs, Muslims, who believed in making their own world. Hence this belief became the first target of the Iranians. The belief in fate. Fate was the basis of Magian belief. For them, whatever was written in fate was a firm decision that could not be changed. This was against the Quranic belief. Iranians spread this belief among the Muslims. According to history, Mabad ben Khalid Jani was the first among the Muslims who raised this issue. He took this from an intellectual known as Abu Yunus, who belonged to Asara. We have mentioned earlier that Asara was an army of intellectuals of the Iranian emperor that was settled in Kufa and Basra. Ghassan Damashqi took this idea from Mabad and spread it further. The focal point of this belief was that a human being is in the grip of his fate. He is helpless and powerless. Some historians believe that Ja'd ben Dirham was the founder of the belief of Jabr, compulsion. According to Ibn al-Nadim, he was of Iranian origin and the follower of Mani's religion, but in public he proclaimed that he was a Muslim. Jaham ben Safwan, who was from Khorasan, learnt about this belief from Dharam. He propagated it among the Muslims. On the issue of fate, my independent book, Kitab al-Taqdir, has been published. The first sect that appeared among Muslims, without any distinction of Shia or Sunni, was the Jabriya, or Qadriya, sect. This belief is contrary to the Quranic belief of accountability of one's deeds. Now the question arises, how a belief that was quite against the basic belief of the Quran became popular among the Muslims. Traditions about fate. In the light of the discussion in the previous pages, we can find an answer to this obviously difficult question very easily. Traditions were fabricated in support of this belief. After that, it was not difficult to declare it as an Islamic belief. In this respect, we will reproduce a few traditions from the chapter on destiny in Mishkat, which is considered as an authentic collection of traditions. 1. Hazrat Abdullah ben Umar relates that the Prophet said, God wrote the destiny of its creatures 50,000 years before the creation of sky and earth and when his throne was on water. Muslim. 2. Hazrat Umar quoted the Prophet as saying, that everything depends on fate, even wisdom and foolishness also depend on that. Muslim. 3. Hazrat Ali relates that there is no one amongst you whose destiny has not been written, if he will go to hell or heaven. Bukhari and Muslim. 4 says that the Prophet said if God has written some adultery in one's fate, that man will commit that. Bukhari and Muslim. Moreover, the Prophet said that God created Adam and then touched the back of Adam with his right hand, produced descendants and said, I have produced them for heaven and they will do the deeds of heavenly people. Then again God touched the back of Adam with his right hand, produced descendants and said that I produced them for hell and they will do the deeds of the people of hell. After hearing this, one person asked the Prophet, what is the use of good deeds? The Prophet said, when God creates somebody for paradise, so he guides him to do the deeds of the people of paradise, and sends him to paradise for his deeds. Similarly, when God creates someone for hell, he guides him to do the deeds of the people of hell, and he is sent to hell for his deeds. From Malik, Tirmizi, Daud. 5. Hazrat Abdullah ben Omar relates that once the Prophet came holding 2 books in his hands. He addressed the people and said, do you know what these books are? We said, O Prophet, we don't know. About the book in his right hand, the Prophet said, this book is from God which contains the name of the people of paradise. Now nothing can be deleted or added in this. Referring to the book in his left hand, the Prophet said, this book is also from God which contains the names of the people of hell. Now nothing can be added or deleted in this. From Tirmizi. 6. Hazrat Abu Darda narrates that the Prophet said, God has freed himself from 5 things related to every human being. It means, he has written 5 things in his fate, which are his age, good or bad deeds, abode, return, death, and rizq, subsistence. From Ahmed. Obviously, when someone will think over such traditions in the light of clear teachings of Quran and knowledge, many questions will be raised in his mind and he will seek a satisfactory answer of these questions. The people who had fabricated these traditions were aware of this situation and thought about its solution. Hence they fabricated such traditions which closed the door of discussion of this issue. For example, Abu Huraira says, we were discussing the issue of fate that the Prophet came and his face became red like pomegranate after hearing our discussion. In a state of great anger he said, are you commanded to discuss this? And I was sent among you for this purpose. The nations prior to you were destroyed because they discussed this issue. So I say swear, and again I say, swear that you will never discuss this issue. Tirmizi. This means that they popularized the belief in fate among the Muslims and also closed the door of its discussion. The Brahmka propagated this belief with full force. Magians believed that events of the forthcoming year and fate of the people was decided on the night of Nowruz. Brahmka introduced this as a Muslim belief with the name of Shab-e-Barat, the night of fate. Fireworks at Shab-e-Barat refresh the memories of the flames of Zoroastrian temples. Shias believe that Shab-e-Qadar is the decided by God. According to Al-Kafi, Imam Abu Jafar said, First of all God created Shab, which first he created the prophet and the wasi. God's wisdom made this a yearly occurrence in which all events of the coming year were registered. Whoever will deny this, he will deny the knowledge of God, because prophets and Muhaddis tell people what they receive from God. Jibril brings this information during that night. Ash-Shafi, Volume 1, p. 284-85. In this tradition, the part which says, "Who denies this, he denies the knowledge of God," is very significant. According to the Quran, there are 5 pillars of faith: God, angels, prophets, divine books, and the Day of Judgment. These pillars are mentioned in the Quran. One becomes a Muslim by accepting them and a non-believer if one rejects them. But now you know that the pillars of Islam are 6 and not 5. I believe in God, His books, His prophets, and that good deeds and bad deeds, and good and evil had been determined by God, and life after death. This means that 5 pillars of faith were commanded by God while one was added later. Now no one can become Muslim if he does not believe in fate. As usual, this addition was done according to traditions. For example, Ali narrated that the Prophet said, "A person cannot become Momin unless he has faith in 4 things." Opening parenthesis. 1. Gives witness that there is no one worth worshipping except God. I am his prophet, God sent me with haqq. 2. Death is reality. 3. Believes in resurrection after death, and 4. Believes in fate. From Tirmizi. In this way, the belief in fate became a pillar of faith, i.e., the belief that profit, loss, grief and happiness, health and sickness, wealth and poverty, honor and dishonor, good and evil, even at the national level, rise and fall, their life and death, victory and defeat, subjugation and rulership, are all predestined by God. Human efforts cannot bring any change in them, only that will happen which is the will of God. You do research to know the causes of the decline of the Ummah. Special committees are appointed, commissions are formed, but there is no need of all this research because the belief in fate is enough to know the cause of the destruction of nations. Ajami conspiracy made this energetic nation a heap of dust by propagating this belief among the Muslims and making it a pillar of faith. The angle of thought is so deviated that if somebody says that this 6th pillar of faith is an addition in Quran and against its fundamental teachings, the whole community rises to kill him. Just think over, with this belief as a pillar of faith, will this nation be able to rise again on its feet ever? One meaning of fate was explained by Umar. See chapter 4 of this book. And the other meaning was given by the Ajami conspiracy. The meaning given by Farooq, that was in accordance with the Quran, was declared kufr, but Ajami meanings became a pillar of Muslim faith. This is how the Ajamis took revenge from the Muslims. Tasawwuf. Mysticism. This is not the end of the Ajami conspiracy. Still there is another arrow in their quiver arsenal. Wisdom, knowledge and expertise all collapsed in front of this arrow, which proved the last nail in the coffin of Islam. We have seen that the break of the seal of the finality of the Prophet and to open a door parallel to revelation. Through Muhaddis. The concept of Muhaddis was presented, but this was confined to the Imams of Shias. Hence this belief was confined to that sect. On the other hand, in Sunnis, the idea of 2 kinds of revelation was developed, and those beliefs which were outside the Quran were declared equal to the Quranic beliefs. However, this was confined to the personality of the Prophet, and all such non-Quranic beliefs were listed in the books of traditions. It was felt necessary that the possibility of acquiring knowledge direct from God should be opened. This need was met with the idea of tasawwuf, mysticism, about which Allama Iqbal wrote to Syed Suleiman Nadwi. There is no doubt that tasawwuf was an alien plant in the land of Islam that was raised in the Ajami intellect. Iqbalnama, Volume 1, p. 78. It is said that the first person in Islam who became famous as Sufi was a resident of Kufa. His name was Abul Hashem Osman ben Sharik, who died in a hermit near Ramla in 106 AH. The basic belief of tasawwuf is that a human being can attain such a status through intensive prayers that he can directly communicate with God. It is apparent that Shias cannot subscribe to this idea of tasawwuf because they limit this communication with God to the God-appointed imams. Hence they opposed the Sufis. However, it is ironic that all Sufi houses, with the exception of Naqshbandiya, trace their lineage to Ali through these Shia imams. Ali is considered the chief Sufi. Wali. For them the status of wilaya is higher than Khilafah. Not only that, the Sufis believes that only the Ahl Bayt can attain the higher status in tasawwuf. Ibn Arabi writes in Fatuhat-e-Makkiyah that the chief Sufi is always from Ahl Bayt. Other Sufis who do not agree with this idea believe that the chief of the Sufi chiefs, Kitab al-Aktab, is always from Ahl Bayt. Tahqiq-e-Sayyid wa Sadat, Mahmud Ahmed Abbasi, p. 219. Sheikh Akbar Ibn Arabi. Shias believed in the idea of muhaddas, which meant that imams get knowledge from the same fountain of divine knowledge from which the Prophet got revelation. The people who believe in tasawwuf have similar views. Grand Sufi Mohiuddin ibn Arabi, who is called the Great Sheikh, writes in his well-known book Fahuzul Hukem. Sufis get knowledge from the same source from which the Prophet got. About the traditions he says, no tradition is free from the error of meaning and personal understanding. Hence Sufis directly ask the Prophet about that. Although Sufis are under the prophets but both get revelations, though the vicegerents of the Prophet, i.e., the Sufis, cannot step outside the circle of the Islamic laws, Shariat. But there is a critical point which only people like us can understand. Arbab-e-Shariat are those who give command in accordance with the Quran and traditions. When they don't find a clear answer in the Quran and traditions, they rely on analogy and interpretation. Ijtihad. But this interpretation is based on Quran and traditions. However, among us, there are people who take this interpretation or knowledge from God through divine inspiration, kashf, and revelation, hence the divine inspiration, kashf, to them and revelation to the Prophet are the same. This is the reason that when the Prophet passed away, he did not appoint anybody his successor because he knew that there will be many people in his ummah who will take Khilafah from God and will become vicegerent of God. God gives this vicegerent the same religious commands and knowledge which he gave to the prophets. Letters to Salim, Vil. 3 p. 42-44. Researchers believe that Ibn Arabi was influenced by the ideas and beliefs of Ikhwan-e-Safa, which was a group of authors who followed the Ismaili school of thought. The group wrote several pamphlets anonymously. Their teachings became popular in Africa and Andalus, Spain, through the writings of Muhammad Abul Qasim Andalusi, died in 395 AH. Therefore researchers believe that Ibn Arabi was influenced by their philosophy. The picture of Sufism that we see in his writings is apparently a reflection of the teachings of Ikhwan-e-Safa. Mashab-i Batni Talim by Mirza Muhammad Saeed. Sufism is against the teachings of the Quran. Sufis call their knowledge a divine inspiration, kashf and ilm. Like the word mazhab, we do not find these words in the Quran. Nor the words tasawwuf or Sufi are there. You have noticed that in wahi and kashaf or ilm, the difference is of wording but their meanings are the same, i.e., acts to knowledge directly from God. The beliefs and ideas which Sufis presented are contrary to the teachings of Islam. For example, 1. Ahman and Yazdan was the basic concept of Mazdaism, which meant a continued struggle between good and evil. Sufis say that the human being is separated from the spirit of God and stranded in the material swamp. Material is evil while the spirit of God is good. Now there is a struggle between material and spirit. The object of human life is that the human body pulls itself out of this material swamp and unites with its origin. A logical result of this belief was that the worldly affairs were considered hateful. Hence the abandonment of family and abandoning the worldly affairs became a basic condition for the cleanliness of the self. About the material universe, the Quran says that God has chained it with his laws and it is the duty of Mu'minin Muslims to unveil these laws and conquer the forces of nature. Opposite to this Quranic idea, the concept of hating and abandoning the world as the purpose of life shakes the foundation of Islam and surely paralyzes a nation which follows such ideology. 2. The Quran says that God created this universe, which is a reality. However, following the Platonian concept of abstract idea, the idea of Sufism is that this material world does not exist. There is only one existence, which is God, and whatever we see is God everywhere. This is called the ideology of Wadat al-Wujud, omnipresence of God. To what extent these people had stretched their idea of omnipresence of God can be seen from the statement of a grand Sufi, Sheikh-e-Akbar. So, in a way, the pharaoh had the right to say, "I am your higher God," because he was not separate from God, though he appeared in the personality of the pharaoh. Fasis al-Hukem. 3. The Sufis claim that their beliefs and ideas are based on the Quran. That is why they say that the literal meanings of the Quran are for the common people while its real meanings are hidden, which only Sufis can know. This statement of Ibn Arabi shows how they mutilate the Quranic verses through hidden knowledge. The simple translation of verse 20:55 is, "From the earth did we create you, and into it shall we return you, and from it shall we bring you out once again." Ibn Arabi in its explanation writes, "We all come out from one source, God, and after death will merge in this oneness. Then we will get perpetual life and again we will be resurrected." Fasis al-Hukem. Authority for the hidden knowledge. It is believed about the hidden, concealed knowledge that it is not revealed to common people but it is confined to special personalities. Some traditions were fabricated to authenticate this concept, such as, Abu Hurairah said, "The Prophet gave me 2 pots of knowledge. I disseminated one, of open knowledge, but if I reveal the other, hidden knowledge, people will cut my throat." Bukhari, Bab al-Ilm. Also Mishkat, Bab al-Ilm. As mentioned in the reference, this tradition is from Bukhari, which is considered the most authentic book. It is a matter of great regret that neither Imam Bukhari nor others who attribute such traditions to the Prophet ever realized that it will have a negative reflection on the personality of the Prophet. God sent revelations to the Prophet and commanded, "O Messenger, proclaim the message which hath been sent to thee from thy Lord. If thou didst not, thou wouldst not have fulfilled and proclaimed his mission." 5:67. On the other hand, God said, "But the transgressors changed the word from that which had been given them. So we sent on the transgressors a plague from heaven, for that they infringed our command repeatedly." 2:59. In view of these clear commands from God, it is a serious allegation on the Prophet to say that the divine knowledge that was given to the Prophet, he divided it into 2 parts. One part was revealed while the other was conveyed to some privileged people with the instructions that it should not be revealed to public. However, our Ala Sharia lists this in the most authentic books of traditions, while Ala Tariqa, followers of Sufism, present this as a proof of hidden knowledge. Laduni knowledge. This hidden knowledge is not written anywhere but is transferred from generation to generation of Sufis through intuition. This is called Elmi Laduni. It is not necessary that a disciple gets this knowledge directly from his master, Murshid. This can be achieved through a hidden method despite the passage of a long time. For example, it is said about Junaid Baghdadi, died in 298 AH, that he received the knowledge of Tasawwuf from a companion of the Prophet, Ans ben Malik. Sufis believe that this hidden knowledge was conveyed to Ali by the Prophet and then transferred verbally after Ali. Besides this transferred knowledge, Sufi saints also receive knowledge directly from God through which Quran's hidden meanings are unveiled. On the distortion of the meanings of the Quran, Allama Iqbal writes in one of his letters, as a matter of fact, search of hidden meanings in any religion or working code and symbols of a nation amounts to mutilation of that working code. This is a very subtle way of abrogation. And this method is invented and adopted by those nations whose nature is mischievous. Majority of Ajami poets are those who by nature were tilted towards the philosophy of omnipresence. Iranian nation was inclined towards this philosophy before the advent of Islam, which blocked its development for some times. However, Iran's natural aptitude resurfaced with time. In other words, in other Sunni Muslims, such literature was produced that was based on the ideology of omnipresence. These poets adopted novel and dubious ways to deny and abrogate the teachings of Islam. Iqbalnama, Volume 1, p. 35. Keeping this in mind, Allama Iqbal wrote in another letter, as far as I know, in Fasis al-Hukem there is nothing but atheism and heresy. Ibid. p. 44. 4. Deen is the name of a complete system and regulation for the social life of human beings. It progresses in its own state. That is why Umar said, no Islam without social life. Islam cannot be imagined without a group. Social life. However, Sufism abhors social life. Sufis believe in individual salvation through mediation and contemplation in hermits. According to this ideology, there cannot be any difference between Islam and Hindu Vedaron, Christian monasticism and pre-Islamic Iranian Magians. Opposition to jihad. Islam describes life as a constant struggle, and the final shape of this struggle is when a group of Muslims comes out for war to resist tyranny and oppression. When they return victorious, they're called Ghazi, and the people who lose their lives are eligible for perpetual life. There is no better deed in Islam than jihad. But Sufism calls this jihad a minor jihad, but calls the abandoning of society and exercising self-control as major jihad. Not only that, they see the armed jihad with contempt. In this respect they have a popular stanza. A Ghazi, who has not yet been martyred, continues the search for an opportunity of martyrdom. But he is misguided, because the martyr of love of God is higher in status. On the day of judgment, it will be declared that he was killed by the enemy while the other one is killed by a friend. It means that the martyr of love is fortunate that he was killed at the hands of his beloved God. Criticizing this stanza, Allama Iqbal says, from the poetic point of view this stanza is wonderful and deserves praise, but if we evaluate it impartially, we find that it is very deceptive and a clever method is used to reject Islamic jihad. It is the art of the poet that though a person is being given poison, he thinks he is given the water of immortality. Unfortunately, Muslims have been believing this for several centuries. Letter to Siraj Din Pal in Iqbalnama, Volume 1 p. 36. All mystic poetry was produced during the period of political downfall of the Muslims. And it should have been like this because when a nation loses power and energy, as Muslims lost after the Tatar attack, its thinking is changed. For them their weakness becomes a thing of beauty and abandoning this world. Seclusion becomes a way of seeking pleasure. Nations hide their laziness and defeat in their struggle for survival behind the curtain of seclusion. In Indian Muslims we see that the climax of poetry reached in the Marsyas. Poetry about the martyrdom of Imam Hussain of Lucknow. Ibid. p-44. In another letter, he writes, "For centuries Indian Muslims are under the influence of the Iranian thoughts. They are not aware of the Arabic Islam and its objective and mission. Their literary as well as social ideals are Imams." Ibid. p-24. He calls this Magian heritage of Muslims and writes with great grief and sorrow. This Magian heritage has dried up the roots of Islam. It has also blocked the development of Islamic spirit and achievement of its objectives. Ahmadiyat and Islam. Allama Iqbal and Tasawwuf. In 1917, Allama Iqbal wrote an article, Islam and Mysticism, that was published in New Era, a newspaper of Lucknow, on July 28, 1917. In this article he described Sufism as jugglery. What kind of teachings is found in the Sufi books? I cannot give detail here but I have given a few examples in my book Salim Ki Naam Kutut. Letters to Salim. Volume 3. The claim of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. When this belief of Sufism, which was based on the Shia concept of Mahadas, opened the door of divine inspiration, then naturally there was a possibility of claiming prophethood. Hence, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, climbing on these stairs, claimed that he reached the status of a prophet. First he wrote, "Our prophet is the last among the prophets. No prophet can come after him. That is why in Sharia, Islamic law, Mahadises are the vicegerents of the prophet." Shahadat al-Quran, p. 28. At another place he writes, "I did not say anything to people except what I have written in my books that I am a Mahadis and God communicates with me as he did with other Mahadises." Hamayat al-Bashra, p. 96. In view of our earlier discussion, it is not difficult to understand where Mr. Mirza borrowed the idea of Mahadis from. Its source is Shia and Sufi literature. For example, as we mentioned earlier, the concept of Mahadis was first appeared among the Shias. It was argued that in verse, "And we did not send before you any messenger or prophet, but when he desired." 22:52. There was the word Mahadis after prophet, Nabi, which is not present in the Quran. To authenticate his claim of Mahadis, Mr. Mirza also quoted this verse with the addition of Mahadis. On the issue of Sufism, an article was published on July 11, 1973 by Pajam-e Sula, which is the spokesman of the Lahori branch of Mirza's followers. This article says, "The terms which are used in his Mr. Mirza's books led to some confusion among our own people and others who consider them the claimer of prophethood. Such terms were Zili Nabi, Brozi Nabi, Amati Nabi, Ger Share Nabi, Fana Fil Rasul and Majazi Nabi." Now the issue is what the source and meaning of these terms is. It is apparent that these terms are not mentioned in the Quran and the traditions. We do not find him even 500 to 600 years after the Prophet, but when we go through the pages of history we find that these terms were coined by the Sufis. This is the bias of their claim. After that, when, according to him, he received God's messages, he writes, "I swear by God that I believe in these Ilm messages in the same way as I believe in the Quran and other divine books." I consider Quran as the word of God, and similarly I consider the divine messages revealed to me as God's messages. Hakikat al-Wahi. The reality of revelation. P. 211. His son and his first Khalifa said, "Remember that when a new prophet comes, then the knowledge, teachings, of the previous prophet also comes through him and not directly. The new prophet becomes a channel for the previous prophet. A wall is erected around the old prophet, thus nothing can be seen except through the new prophet. Therefore, there is no Quran except that one which is presented by the reincarnated Masih Maw'id. And there is no tradition except that is seen through the prism of Masih Maw'id." Akbar al-Fazl, Qadian, July 15, 1924. And, do you know the major quality for which God had chosen Mr. Mirza for this office? The last truth was appeared in the solitude of Qadian by God, and he talked to Masih Maw'id, who was of Iranian origin. Ibid. February 3, 1935. Coincidentally, Mirza Ali Muhammad Bab and Bahauddin were also from Iran, and the deed was to cancel the command of jihad. Do you see where his lineage is linked? The biggest achievement of this God-appointed prophet was that he cancelled the command of jihad. The intensity of jihad, i.e., the religious wars, was gradually reduced by God. During the era of Hazrat Musa, people were killed even for the belief in God, even suckling infants were killed, and then during the period of our Prophet, killing of children and old people and women was banned. Therefore certain nations only paid jizya, poll tax, instead of accepting Islam, faith that was considered as a way of salvation. And then Masih Maw'id completely banned jihad. Arba'in, number 4, p. 15, notation by Mirza Ghulam Ahmed Rabbani. From today the human jihad through sword is banned by the command of God. Now, anybody who raises a sword against an infidel and calls himself Ghazi, disobeys the Prophet who said 1,300 years ago that after the appearance of Masih Maw'id all jihad with the sword will be banned. There is no jihad with the sword after my appearance. We raise the white flag of faith and reconciliation. Qadiani Madhab, p. 296. Gist of the Persian conspiracy. This was a brief introduction of the conspiracy through which the Iranians not only took revenge from the Arabs for the defeat, but also uprooted the foundations of Islam. Allama Iqbal summed up all this discussion in one sentence. The result of the vanquish of Iran was not that Iran accepted Islam, but Islam was painted in the Iranian color. New Era, July 28, 1917. This is the Persian Islam, i.e., Magian heritage, which is being practiced since centuries ago. It does not distinguish Shia or Sunni or Ahl Hadith or Ahl Fiqh or Arbab-e-Sharia or Ashab-e-Tariqa. All are painted in the same color. And the result is, the magic of this conspiracy is that our religious leaders are in a constant violent dispute over the principles and minute details of Islam and issue fatwa of infidelity against anybody who says, "Appraise yourself in the mirror of Quran. Your present condition has been rotten and you should escape from yourself. Weigh your character in the balance of Quran and instigate the old era revolutions. I.e., show the enthusiasm of action of the early days of Islam. All Allamas are united in vehemently opposing such person. What is the solution? Now the question how this Ajami conspiracy can be countered and how Islam can be salvaged from this wreckage. Allama Iqbal believes that it is definitely possible. The only condition is that the Islamic world moves forward in this direction with the spirit of Hazrat Umar, who was the first critique and freedom-loving heart of Islam, who dared to say during the last days of the Prophet, "For as the Book of God is enough." Qutbat Iqbal. This is also my wish and mission of life. This book is the latest contribution in my humble efforts in that respect. Tolui Islam Trust 25B, Gulberg 2, Lahore, Pakistan. toluiislam@gmail.com